Hi, I'm Gregory Paulini, and in today's episode of Table Saw Techniques, I'm going to show you how simple it is to resaw lumber on your SawStop table saw. So stick around. Most folks shy away from resawing or book matching lumber because they think you need to have a bandsaw in order to do it. But the truth is, you can resaw or book match stock using your SawStop table saw. And the process is pretty straightforward. Let me walk you through the whole setup. Resawing is a woodworking operation in which we cut the wood along its length. But rather than orienting the lumber with its face against the table saw, we orient it with the edge against the table saw, with the goal being to create two or more thinner pieces. We're still cutting with the grain though, whether we're on our face or on its edge. So we're performing a rip cut, and I want to have a ripping blade installed in my SawStop. My plan for this piece of maple is to rip it down its center, book match it, which is a form of resawing where we open the board up to create mirror images, and then I'm going to turn this board into a panel of a door. So I want to find the center, and the easiest way to do that is to just make a mark roughly halfway across the board or through its thickness, but from each edge. I might not be able to find the dead center on one layout line, but by putting two without changing my marking gauge, the distance in between the layout, well, that's going to be dead center of the board. And that's what I'll use for the setup on my SawStop. Now that I've got the center of the board identified, I'm going to line those marks up with the teeth on the ripping blade. And I'm going to bring my fence over so that it ends up touching the board there and holds everything in position. Next, I want to set my blade height. And my blade height should be just a hair above the halfway height of my workpiece. Now, this piece of hard rock curly maple happens to be 4 inches in height. So I want my blade height to be just a hair above 2 inches. That looks good. And I want a lot of control and stability during this cut, so I'm going to use feather boards. That'll make sure that the board stays nice and tight up against the fence. Now before I make this cut, I think it's important that I tell you that I'm using S4S stock, which basically means it's been surfaced on all 4 sides. Both faces have been planed, and they're parallel to one another, and they're both flat. And the edges are both straight and parallel to each other, and square to the faces. I want to make sure that the board I'm going to resaw is square and stable. I don't want this shifting during the cut. And before I actually start cutting, I want to make sure that I'm using my safety equipment. I want to have safety glasses on, and whenever I'm working with power tools, I want to have ear protection. Alright, so now we're ready to make some cuts. I'm using basic and safe table saw operations here. These are the same steps that I've outlined in a previous episode of Table Saw Techniques. I guide the workpiece through the blade, but I let the saw do the work. I don't force the workpiece through the saw. And I never want to get my hands directly over the blade. Instead, I'm using a push stick. Now I flip the workpiece end for end. I want to make sure that the same face references against the SawStop's fence so that the kerfs line up directly above and below each other. The riving knife keeps the 2 separate pieces from joining together and binding as I complete the cut. And now I can open up my pieces, and I've got virtually mirror images of each side of the board. It's a true book match. Now obviously I've got to get in here and do a little scraping or a little sanding in order to remove the burning, but I've got two flat surfaces, and once I glue these together, I'm going to have a great panel in order to use as a panel in a door or on the side of a bookcase, or I could even use these as thin veneers for another project. So I'm going to clean these up real fast and show you what the final result would look like. Wow. Look at the way the curl goes from one piece to another. That's a perfect mirror image of the other board. That's going to make a beautiful panel. And that's how simple it is to resaw stock on your SawStop table saw. Be sure to join me again for another episode of Table Saw Techniques. Wow.